Well, it's great to have Ash Hirani on with us today here in Rich Politics. I've been so excited to get him on. Wanted to talk to him about so many different issues. He's one of the founding signatories for Don't Divide Us. Ash, do you want to tell our viewers a little bit about what is Don't Divide Us?
Yeah, so I was approached by some acquaintances, some friends, in response to the BLM protests, actually, and because of my work with the local Hindu community, they wanted to explore whether there was something constructive that we could do to absolutely take a stand against racism, which we acknowledge exists, but to do so in a way where we can bring communities together, not only the Black community or the Asian community or the white community, but actually communities working together, sort of like we used to back in the 70s and the 80s, when racism was a real problem in the UK. It really was. I mean, people, myself, I remember some awful times, some truly awful times, personal assaults, National Front marches past our house, windows being smashed in, because they knew where the Brownies lived, and I remember those times, and I just thought, what, this is a great idea, and actually let's do it, and let's see what comes of it. Let's see whether we can have a positive influence on the conversation, or even maybe even achieve something, and I think that's how it all started out. Lots of people got together. We didn't know each other, a lot of us, but we got together behind a sort of common message of, actually, let's stamp out racism, let's challenge it where it occurs, but let's try and take a balanced approach here, because let's not catastrophize everything. Let's not let's not go down this line of everything and everyone is racist, because if we start doing this and we start pushing people into silos and different groups, then we're never ever going to be able to unite against what is actually a bloody noble cause, really. Yeah. How do we even begin to fight something that is so abhorrent? And how do we do that effectively if we're all divided? And so that's where Don't Divide Us.
We've talked a lot about this, Ash, haven't we? When we've been together, whether it's been in London or elsewhere, and it seems to me that identity politics comes into it a lot sometimes, because we've seen a lot of politicians make comments and statements that really try to divide people based on race and color, and I think, and even faith. I mean, you mentioned your work in the temple there. I was in church this morning. You were probably in your temple this morning. The faith community during lockdown just showed some of the good parts of humanity, didn't it? I mean, I know we talked a lot about your work. I mean, tell us a little bit about, what you saw happening during the kind of the start of the lockdown. Let's go back now. I don't want to revisit it too much, but let's go back. What impact did it have on people, living in homes, in communities, especially in the faith community that you belong to?
So there were two, I had two sort of very different insights, actually, because although I was doing a lot of work through the temple, and that kept me really, really busy, because obviously we had to be careful about what we were doing, the services we were holding, the fact that a lot of elderly people were coming to the temple. We had to manage all of that and say, do you know what, that I think we've got to the point where we've got to shut the temple now to the public, because there was, I was trying to make sense of all the noise, of all the sort of, this is a catastrophe and this could kill loads of people, and people going, what are you talking about? It's just a flu. And in between those two extremes, there was a lot of nuance. There was a lot of information that you had to sort of weed through so that you could do the best for your community. Now, I don't take decisions to shut a temple down lightly, but it's something that I had to do. It got to the stage where everybody was so confused. The rest of the management committee just said, look, Ash, you keep an eye on the Prime Minister's announcements, you try and make sense of it, you make whatever decisions you've got to make, and the entire committee will back you. So it was a bit of a responsibility. And in sort of fulfilling that responsibility, I found two things. First of all, I found that there were people in the wider community, because when we talk about local communities, we often talk about an ethnic group or a religious group. But actually, for those of us who were born in Britain, who were born in the UK, and who have loved this country, all our lives, it's very difficult sometimes to see community as those sorts of silos or those sorts of groups, because to me, community is my next door neighbour, community is the lady living across the road, community is the retired vicar living over there. That to me is my community. And so when I was looking around, and I because I'm quite a affable chap, I already knew lots and lots of people in the local area. So I knew who was vulnerable. I knew that, actually, Shirley's living on her own, and she's going to need someone to knock on the door to make sure that she's got food in, to make sure that her meds get to her on time. But equally, there are people that come to the temple that we also have a responsibility to. There are lots and lots of elderly people who are living on their own, who had no one to reach out to. Now, there's this perception that Asian communities tend to be very family orientated, and yes, they do, but that doesn't mean that every single Asian family has a son, or every single elderly person from the Asian community has a son or daughter that they could ring up. There are people who have children who've emigrated to Australia. They can't ring up and say, I need some milk and bread.
So Ash, talk me through the impact that you're talking about, some of the impacts that lockdown had. And we're going back to the start now. We're not here to discuss whether lockdowns were right or wrong or political decision. We're talking about real lives, the impact that it had in your community. I seen it here as well. And like yourself, the faith community, and not just the faith community, but those of no faith, really rallied around and really supported the vulnerable, the elderly, taking, I remember doing food shops in the back of my van. I was running a courier service then, and I remember doing a massive food shop and dropping it off in different places to people who couldn't shop because they were shielding. And it did really bring the country together. Yes, it had this kind of, it was a terrible time for us all in the country, but we complied at the start, and it kind of really changed society in a way, didn't it? It really had an impact on society, don't you think?
I think when you look at the first lockdown, I think it really shone a spotlight on us all as individuals, on us all as communities, on us all as a country. We saw people who were barging other people out of the way to grab packs of toilet roll.
Yeah.
And we saw people who were standing back going, for goodness sake, we're just trying to get a few essential items to this person or that person because they're wheelchair bound, or they're vulnerable, or they're cancer sufferers. My own experience, and this is something I'll never get over. My uncle was diagnosed with cancer in February. Now, it was already reasonably advanced. That wasn't to say at that point he was dying. That's not how the hospital presented it to us. But when you think that we cared for him, he died in May. So he was diagnosed in February, he died in May. In February, we had a telephone consultation, and then in March, we had a further consultation, again on the telephone, with the oncologist, who turned around and said, you know what, we've just discovered this COVID thing, and actually, if your uncle has chemotherapy, he's going to be really vulnerable, and actually, COVID could kill him before the cancer does. Well, actually, the cancer killed him before the COVID ever touched him, and he died without a single course of treatment. We didn't even try. He may have died anyway. Try explaining that to my grandma, who already lost a daughter to cancer 2 years ago. And what really struck me was that we cared for him at home. So I was going round there, and as you know, the lockdown rules permitted visiting someone for care purposes.
Yeah. So
we were caring for him at home. There were people on the opposite side of the road getting on the phone to the police saying, there's people going in there, that bloke's going in there again. I mean, seriously, what did we become as a society? What happened to people? What happened to people where it just became you were either a complier or a non-complier. What happened to everything in between? You know, it was okay for me to do multiple shops in one day. It was okay for me to go to Morrison's or Sainsbury's or whatever, you know, and do multiple shops and do multiple drop-offs to different people on my days off work. But I go and care for my uncle and someone gets on the blower to the police and says, yeah, there's this bloke he keeps going into that house.
Yeah.
What
I think what you're saying there, Ash, is, and sorry to hear that news as well. You've shared it with me before. I think we saw the good and the evil in humanity, didn't we? You know, there were, as you mentioned, some of the parts of what happened during that first lockdown. There were a lot of things that, you know, very questionable. I mean, even political decisions, which were, you know, I know we're not here to talk about politics per se today, but just to talk about, you know, what you feel about lockdowns and the impact on society. But I really saw the good in humanity as well during those first few months of lockdown. And as you've expressed and experienced yourself, but I also saw the other side of that, where operations were being cancelled with people with terminal illnesses, and, you know, people couldn't shop. Here in Wales in particular, the Welsh government made a decision on shopping in places. Some was non-essential, some was essential, and they were, you know, trying to
remember that?
interpret which was.
I remember aisles being taped up with cellophane and
and you know, and I think we come out of all that, and, you know, I mean, whatever our thoughts are on lockdowns, I've got my own personal opinions. Nevertheless, you know, we've had to go through it. The country's had to face it, and I wonder what you think about, you know, where it's taken us as a society. How have we progressed? Have we learned anything from it, Ash?
Richard, I think there are a great deal of lessons to be learned for everybody, from politicians, civil servants, public servants, members of the community, people working in various industries. I think we all have lessons that we can take away. Sometimes when you look at conversations on social media, you think, do you know what? We're progressing, people are talking, people are learning. And sometimes you just think, do you know what? We're just more and more and more divided. And actually, you're either, you know, if you raise concerns over lockdowns and the impact that they have on people and communities, you know, you're an opponent. And sometimes, you know, if you're pro-vaccination, you know, I have no issues with people who are pro-vaccination and people who are anti-vaccination. It's a personal choice. Make a choice. But do you know what really, really gets me? Is how the two sides can suddenly start throwing stones at each other and somehow thinking that they're the better side. I've been vaccinated to protect other people, so therefore I'm a better person. No, actually, you've been vaccinated to protect yourself so that you have less chance of being hospitalized if you get COVID. That doesn't make you a better person. Yes, that will mean that it will be one less NHS bed that's taken up. But actually, the people on the other side of the argument who have legitimate concerns, do you really think that you're going to win them over by demonizing them and you know, labeling them anti-vaxxers, or people who have had the vaccines themselves but are actually concerned about their children having vaccines? Is that not a reasonable conversation that should be had in a reasonable manner so that people can make informed choices? And actually, again, it's one of those areas where, and I don't blame social media for this, because social media is a tool, but it's a tool that really showcases the best and the worst of us. And frankly, I have, over the past 12 months, whether it comes to COVID, whether it comes to racism, whether it comes to immigration, whether it, you know, whatever the subject may be, I've seen more of the worst of us on social media than I have the best of us. Now, I include myself in that. Richard, sometimes the debate gets so fractious, and sometimes you just get so fed up that you just post something and you just go, do you know what?
Well, Ash, you say that the worst time for me to post is if I'm out in my local rugby club or the pub and I've had a few jars and I see something on Twitter and I think, nah, and I think I tweet it and I get home, I think I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have said that. So listen, we're all
human, and that's not a problem, Richard. But the problem is when we do these things, and actually the subject matter that we're discussing is so important that it actually deserves a better response.
Yeah.
And I think it's incumbent upon us all to do better. And that's one of the reasons why,
Well,
I've
Ash,
known
I want to ask you a question on this, because I'll interrupt you because I don't want to move on from this. You're talking about divisions in society. We repair them through open debate and discussion rather than shutting each other down. Race relations and all that kind of stuff you've mentioned. I mean, you tweeted 3 days ago, and I'm going to read the tweet to our viewers here. And you mentioned immigration as well, because immigration has been quite a divisive thing in our country for many, many years. Prior to the referendum, UKIP, come in and rise in and all that, and the big kind of anti-immigration policy that they had. And you tweeted something that really kind of, let me just read it to the viewers. It says this: the debate on immigration is becoming more fractious by the day. Immigration can bring much enrichment to the UK. Immigration can be a danger to the UK. These two statements are both simultaneously true. Unless we acknowledge and discuss both, we'll just go around in circles. I thought that was a fantastic tweet. I mean, do you care to explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, I remember tweeting that, actually. I do remember tweeting that. So back when my family came over to the UK, my grandparents came to the UK because there was a shortage of workers. People were being invited to fill lots and lots of jobs, lots and lots of vacancies. And people came from all over the world to do that. And it was a good thing, because it was a good thing for the country. But actually, there was some nervousness, because people were suddenly seeing people from communities that they had never lived amongst, that they'd never lived next door to, that they'd not even heard of, really. And so it brought about a new dynamic, it brought about a new conversation. But it was largely positive, because people were coming, they were working, they were contributing. It was positive. They were trying their best to integrate as best as they could. But obviously there was an issue for some people, and movements like the National Front and all those sort of came about. Ultimately, we've moved on from that, in that immigration has today become far more mainstream. Moving around, people moving from one country to another has become, as travel has developed, as we have more planes in the air, people move around. So it does become more mainstream. But I think what happens is people's perceptions of that aren't necessarily consistent with what actually goes on in the day-to-day lives of immigrants and those who employ them or live near them or go to school with them or work with them. The dynamic has changed. Things have changed an awful lot. Now, I firmly believe that immigration can bring a great deal of advantage to the UK. Look at the situation with HGV drivers. One could argue that was poor planning for Brexit. We voted out in 2016. We should have known, we should have planned. Okay, shoulda, woulda, coulda. But actually, if we can turn around and say, do you know what, we need HGV drivers, we're going to put them on the list and actually say, you know what, if you're an HGV driver, yeah, we're going to fast track your visa. That's a good thing. Immigration can enrich the UK. Immigration has brought us many wonderful things, but at the same time, it brings us dangers if it's not handled correctly, because immigration is a policy issue. It's a policy issue for whichever government happens to be in power, for whichever political party happens to be in power. And one of the issues that we have is that people don't feel as though they have a voice in the matter. And when you're making such policy decisions that are going to have huge impacts on people's lives, people aren't necessarily going to oppose immigration, but they do want to feel as though they've had a voice in the matter. Because when you actually look at the bad side of immigration, actually, you look at importing practices that are not necessarily compatible with what we are used to in a British democracy. People have never had a say on that.
Yeah, I think, Ash, can I just say, I'm listening to you, I'm intrigued to know your thoughts on this. I mean, I mean, as you say, immigration can be a good and a bad thing. And I agree with that. And I've been called, anti-immigration kind of, campaigner of this, that, and the other because of my personal opinions. Now, it's not immigration I have an issue with. It's uncontrolled immigration that I have an issue with. When we have people that are not fleeing war-torn countries that are coming here illegally, and those trafficking them are profiting from it as well. I think as members of the public, when we see this going on and the lack of control that we see from whichever government's in power, as you mentioned, whatever the policy might be, when we're a small island, relatively small, our resources are very thin. When, we're post-industrial now, we don't manufacture much in this country anymore. We're kind of more of a service industry and, come here for holidays and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I just think that the resources we have, the strain on the NHS, our public services, all these things, and this is how I kind of see it without being anti-immigration, because I got friends who are immigrants, who are over here. So, but I see the pressure that it puts on every aspect within society. And I think that's where it's not a race issue, is it? It's more to do with the fact that it's a resource issue. We only have so much to be able to give out. I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Let's be clear. There are racists in society for whom no one other than a white English man will do. But there is a great deal of nuance to this debate, and there's a great deal of truth in what you say as well. You are never, ever, ever going to convince the most far right of extremists that immigration is good for the UK. You're not going to. There's no point in even trying. But to simply label everybody who raises a concern as a racist does nothing to advance the debate. It does nothing for social cohesion. It does nothing for anybody. We need to stop throwing labels around. And where people have concerns, we need to have a positive conversation, because ultimately, immigration will be a policy decision, and which way it goes is going to end up in someone's manifesto. And the very people who you're screaming racist at are going to be voting for somebody. So actually, if you want to effect change that is positive and lasting and in line with your values and your beliefs, then you need to have positive conversations. Because if you start screaming at people just because they turn around and say, well, do you know what? There's no spaces in my child's school. I couldn't find, my child got their very last choice, because all the other schools were oversubscribed. I can't get a GP appointment. I'm waiting for an operation and I've just been put back on the waiting list and I'm in terrible pain. All these things are legitimate concerns. Now, there may be other policy decisions that influence all those different things. I'm not saying there aren't. But if we cannot make a positive case for immigration without screaming racist and fascist and all manner of isms at people who dare raise their voices because they're concerned about what's going on, then quite frankly, Richard, we have no hope. As a society, we have no hope.
I think this is what's happened in society as well. I mean, we mentioned politics and government, and policy is a big part of our everyday lives. And when I speak to people, in the pub or down the rugby club or wherever I mix with my friends down the football club, I go to a lot of clubs because there's bars there. But anyway, that aside, they don't talk about policy, but they talk about whether they got enough food coming in, whether how they're going to manage with the rise in national insurance contributions. It's going to affect their pockets, or some people who are on low wages on universal credit saying to me, I'm going to lose £80 a month, and it's a choice between the electric or and yet they're working people. And when you discuss policy with them, or politics, they turn off. But that's the tragedy, because they don't engage in that conversation, because it is policy that changes things in our communities, because they don't see the politicians will change anything, because it's always the same. They always say in Ash, as you probably heard it said, what's the point in voting? Nothing ever changes. And I think that's a tragedy of where we've come to in 2021, for the last decade or so, because it does matter, doesn't it? Because, the right to vote and to elect people to represent us is so important, because that's where real change happens, because that's the seat of power. Whether we agree with that change or not, or that policy, people have to engage with it, don't they?
I think it's a great tragedy that so many people feel politically homeless, and so many people feel as though their vote doesn't matter. I was talking to my cousin yesterday after dinner. We had a family gathering, and one of my cousins, who we drove back with, he said, I haven't voted for years. And I just think that that is such a tragedy, that people feel so disconnected from the people who make decisions that are going to have a huge impact on our everyday lives, that they just don't turn out to vote. I mean, crumbs. When did we get to that stage?
Yeah, you're speaking of that, Ash. I mean, I'm going to pull up another tweet now, just while we're on here. Because
me and my Twitter.
Yeah. Well, yes, you can follow Ash as well. Don't forget to follow him, Ash Hirani, and you surely appreciate it. Ash, just you mentioned people being politically homeless. I mean, you know, I've gone through an incredible political journey myself, really. I wasn't into politics until 2016, you know, the Brexit vote and everything else. And then I got into politics, but I would class myself before that as a lifelong Labour supporter. My family were Labour supporters, you know, fighting for the working man. And, you know, we had the coal mine shut down. We blamed Margaret Thatcher, although, you know, Labour shut a lot more mines here than her. But anyway, you know, all this kind of stuff. And I began looking around, and I joined, I know I was a candidate for the Brexit party, and then I was with the Welsh Assembly. I don't believe devolution's working for Wales, you know, and I've gone on this kind of journey, really. And I've never showed allegiance to one political party, although my views I consider to be conservative. I'm a socialist at heart, more than likely. If you sat down and talked to me about, you know, what I think and about injustices, equality, I'm probably a socialist. So I
Rich, I think so am I. I'm probably one of the biggest raving lefties when it comes to some things, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think we need to stop, Richard. I think we need to stop this nonsense now of he's a lefty and he's a right winger, or she's a this or she's a. We need to stop. Most people will be a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And that's okay on different policy issues. We need to stop labelling people.
Yeah, we do, but
having expectations.
Yeah, but this has been the problem, and we're not going to go into the party politics of it, but this has been the problem with the Labour Party, because they've lost their identity, because you knew where you were. Forget left or right wing now, or if you were soft left, right left, or whatever it was. This tweet, I'm just going to read it because it brings into the conversation here. You said, the reason why so many on the left are politically homeless isn't because they changed. It's because the modern left changed in order to capitulate to a noisy minority that is often devoid of any ideas. The tragedy for us all is that poor opposition makes for a poor democracy. And I say amen to that, because that is true. And this is where we find ourselves, Ash, isn't it?
That was one of my many exasperations on Twitter, actually. I sometimes I just blurt things out, and I just think, do you know what? I'm just so fed up. I'm so fed up with everything. I'm so fed up of people screaming at each other. And that was, yeah. You could. I suppose you get the exasperation in that, don't you? What I was really trying to say, Richard, is that I've never changed, or I don't think I've changed. I think I've matured. I think I've grown. I think my outlook has changed somewhat, yes, but at heart, I still have compassion in my heart. Compassion is what drives me. But equally, I don't like people taking the mickey out of me. And I don't like people taking advantage of me. Yeah. Because I'll let you do it so much, but there will come a point where I will hit back, and I will hit back hard. You know, and I think that's true of most people in this country. Most people in the UK are good-natured, they're warm, they're welcoming, they're embracing. That doesn't speak for everyone, I know. But if you push those people too far, at some point they're going to go, right, that's it. And I guess what I was getting at was, you know, I was looking at all sorts of tweets that day. I was looking at tweets about racism and tweets about trans, the trans debate and women's rights and all. And I just sat back and I just thought, what's happened to people? What has happened to us? Because we can talk about all of these things, but we don't have to talk about it in this way, in this manner where we deride each other and make derogatory comments about each other. And actually, that was one of my real motivating factors for joining the Academy of Ideas. You know, So I went to the battle. So for the first time in my life, I went to the Battle of Ideas event. I thought, you know what, I'm gonna do it. And I just thought to myself, this is just a load of people talking about stuff yet again, and most of it's going to go over my head because it's all about academics and critical race theory and this, that, and the other. And I just thought, do you know what? No, give it a go, give it a chance. And actually, I went, and some of the debates were like, oh, okay, I don't quite understand what they're talking about. But actually, I met so many young people, Richard, who would identify as lefties, or who would identify as very, very right, and lots in between. And you know, the one thing that struck me, Richard, was I was looking at these youngsters in their 20s, and I was thinking, my goodness, aren't you articulate? Aren't you respectful?
Yeah.
The conversations that these people were having are the level of conversations that not even our leaders are having, you know? And I just think to myself, what have we become as a society? That is what we need. Because these are the people who are going to be the leaders of tomorrow. They're going to be the CEOs of tomorrow. They're going to be our community leaders of tomorrow. And actually, it prompted me just this week, actually, to join the Academy of Ideas. And I got my little welcome letter through, and, you know, and a few little booklets, you know, letters on liberty, and, you know, so which I haven't had a chance to read, but I will do. And I'm going to be going to the Battle of Ideas Festival, because I just find it so uplifting. And I just think to myself, actually, that's what we need. That's what we need more of, not Twitter, but actual people talking to each other.
Yeah, I think on that, I'm unashamedly going to give a plug here to Academy of Ideas, which I've been to, I think, two myself. The first one was before lockdown, and I was asked to contribute on a panel, and I absolutely loved it. And as you say, there were people there from a broad church of political views, the age range, where there's so many young people there who were engaged. I mentioned earlier, you know, people in our communities don't seem to be, you know, engaged with politics or policy, but I met so many people there that did. And the last one, I think I saw you down there as well, was at London, the church house that Claire Fox and Ella and Mo Lovett and all those wonderful people who do, and all those behind the scenes of volunteers, an incredible space where people from different political opinions and views can come together and have respectful debate with each other, sometimes heated, but all in the spirit of unity, in the sense that, you know, we're all here, even though we disagree with each other, we can do it with respect. And I've never been to anything like that before. So this is a big plug, by the way. So if you've not got your tickets yet for Academy of Ideas, and it's 9th and 10th of October, make sure you get them. I'll put a link in the bottom of this video. There we are. That's for Claire and the team. but seriously, I'm trying to make some moves to my diary to come down to it. Ash, I can't quite do it yet. I've got to change some appointments around. I'm going to try and get down as well. But yeah, I mean, what you said there is that it's a healthy space for debate, isn't it? For people without shouting at each other, isn't it? That's what it is, isn't it?
If we want to effect change, whatever that change may be, if we want to effect lasting change in our country, we need to win people over. I've said it time and time again. It amazes me every single time how people feel that they can scream and shout and deride others, and then they feign surprise when they lose at the ballot box. What did you expect? What did you honestly expect to happen when you go around behaving like that? If we want to win people over, we need to have positive conversations. We need to make positive arguments. But at the same time, Richard, we need to respect people's democratic right to disagree with us. And that's
well, I don't think Angela Rayner's comments at the Fringe conference meeting this week was helpful at all, calling people homophobic, racist scum. I'm not asking you to comment on it, but I don't think that kind of
I'd rather not go into that.
No, but I think stuff like that doesn't help. Not just her. I mean, I've seen it on the centre right.
You know, Richard, I find that sometimes I look around at those who lead us, those who rule over us, perhaps some may argue. And you can do nothing. Well, what can you do but sigh? What can you do but sit back and sigh?
Yeah.
What more is there to say on that? Really?
Well, we can do this. We can have a show and discuss it. We're doing. Ash, listen, our time is almost up. Listen, I always ask the guests this question. If you were able to sit down with Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland, what would you say to him?
Gosh, you've really put me on the spot there. What would I say to Boris? What would I say to Boris? I'd say, please listen. Please listen. Please hear us. Don't just listen, but hear us. There is a country out there that is crying out for some sort of leadership, for some sort of policy that's going to bring us all together, that's going to make us less divided, that actually may just stop Remainers and Brexiteers hating each other. It may just stop black and white fighting against each other. Do something, do anything. But when you do what you do, please don't do it for party political purposes, because actually there are some things that are beyond politics. The way things that affect our communities so deeply are beyond politics. And I would really say to the whole House, please, for goodness sake, put party politics to one side, because in all the noise that you're making, that noise is being mirrored out by the public at large. They are taking their lead from you. And actually, there are real victims out there, whether it comes to racism, whether it may be some sort of phobia or ism. There are real people out there who are facing these issues. And for all the noise, they're not being heard. So please stop the noise and start hearing what's actually going on out there.